I'm joined now by Aaron Crow, CFO, and Bruce Linton, Chairman of Martello Technologies. Welcome.
Hey, good to be in Toronto, James.
You bet. Bruce, we're going to start with you. You're the Chairman of Martello Technologies, yet your famous sort of reputation derives from cannabis, as far as the world knows. But you've had a long pedigree in the technology space prior to your involvement in cannabis. Tell us about that, please.
Well, I was, in fact, CEO of Martello for the first 4.5 years of Canopy as well. Mm-hmm. And the reason I was is I had this idea that if I had multiple things going at once, maybe one would work. Turned out both of these worked, and 4 or 5 years of 2 full-time jobs as CEO was enough. And so we recruited in a gentleman, John Proctor, to become CEO, Aaron is CFO, and I became co-chairman with the fellow that was my very first boss and mentor, a guy named Sir Terence Matthews. And so I'd say part of the reason Canopy worked pretty well was that we tried to think about scalability. And scalability in any business has to be, how do I make everything virtual, digital? We had rules. You can't buy a server. You can't buy a PBX.
So what is the business of Martello exactly?
So think of voice as an application. Voice used to be a phone, you pick it up and it has a little string attached, and that was kind of nice. But now what happens is we're using our PCs and we're integrating everything, meaning you're doing Skype for Business or Zoom calls, you've got virtual phones, you're trying to run everything over a network.
Uploading video in real time to multiple...
Right. And when you're on a phone call or you're having a collaboration across a whole bunch of jurisdictions, it starts being a bit choppy a lot of the times, a bit difficult, and the CIO has no clue what went wrong. You know that it's not working. And so what Martello does is we have about 1 million endpoints. So think of it as devices in about 5,000 customers around the globe who all pay us about 20 cents per endpoint, maybe a bit more depending on what we get, to monitor what's going on, analyze where the problems are, and increasingly we're buying companies that give us solutions to fix those problems. And so the effect is that all these applications, of which voice is a very sensitive one, work way better, especially for, say, United Nations or Volkswagen or a hotel chain. A little shout out to the Sheraton in Toronto.
Yes.
There's 3 of us traveling to go around and explain Martello, and we all stayed at the beautiful Sheraton City Center. I think it shows that we're not wasting shareholder money. And at about 7:45 this morning, their network failed if you happen to be trying to do a Zoom call. You got blown up. Do you care when you stay at a hotel now for business if they have nice fluffy pillows, or you get a free coffee, or if their platform called the web works? Like, I can't stay someplace that doesn't actually have a highly functional, very reliable, great bandwidth platform.
Okay, so you've got clients around the world. Is the company profitable at this point?
We are getting very close to profitability, very focused on bringing our EBITDA to positive at this point. Not quite there yet, but certainly a focus for the company as we move forward. We've spent a lot of time over the last year growing our platform for scalability, and that's really what our key...
Sure. And is the competitive landscape in this space very rich, deep?
No, so part of the way we started, this is a company that, it's becoming a success after focus for almost 10 years. And what it started off was a science project that said, if Mitel is going to see people move from business phones that are physical and a PBX to virtual ones, what's that mean? And the science turned into a product, the product turned into a company, and now the company has this base. And we've done 3 acquisitions, and the reason we're walking around explaining what we're up to is we think we can do more, that we can buy things at a couple times top line, and we trade at 4 or 5, and that we're really good now at taking things and making them software as a service. So that, call it $12 million sort of trailing revenue, a majority of that is 90+% margin, and it's on a recurring basis. So by waking up on the 1st of January this year, we have $11.5 or $12 million of revenue coming in. And so what is interesting is I think this one, the goal I have to stay as co-chairman is when it gets to $100 million recurring revenue on an annualized basis, I will think that I've done all I can do to help make it go, and so now the push is to get there.
Right. Okay, and so then the importance of partnerships in this IT environment in this world is obviously significant. You're a Microsoft co-sell program partner. What other partnerships do you have out there that's going to drive the business into 2020 and beyond?
Well, Aaron will speak to them a bit as I wrap, but you think of, a lot of people aren't aware that Microsoft is not dead, so it's good that you brought that up, in that everything that's Microsoft now is Office 365. You no longer need Larry, the IT guy. You actually are logging in, getting access, and there's no physical disk you're loading. It's a very different world, and that means the network has to work. So we're building up that. In the case of Milestones, where we started, they're about attaching to their systems about half our revenue, a little bit more. But it's not from Milestones, it's from Milestones clients.
Sure.
And over time, we start competing with players that are in what they call this software-defined networking. Just think of it as really smart virtual boxes that actually say, oh, voice traffic's a bit more intelligent and needed better bandwidth than, say, watching YouTube. And so you start to manage and measure and route based on what's the purpose of the actual packet. And so I think, our auditors and things, we have a sort of, it's a tier one company, right?
Yep.
Who are auditors?
Deloitte,
Yeah.
Deloitte.
And who's our debt with?
RBC.
Right. So this is a company it's designed to be a good, big company.
Right. Okay, so the gross margins at 91.5%, that's almost enough to make me fall out of my chair backwards, which would be unprofessional. But so how do you achieve such high margins and yet have to look yet to the future for profitability?
Well, I think the key on the high margins is really around the type of product we have, right? It's software. Our hardware piece is a small part of the business. The cost is minimal. We're looking at virtualizing that and moving towards that, so low cost there as well. So when we look at that subscription software business, those actual cost of sales is not large, right? You look at you've got a reseller channel strategy, which reduces your costs as well. So I think some of those key pieces drive that high margin, and that really again drives, as Bruce talked about earlier, the scalability of the business, right? With those high margins, the dollars you add on are just dropping to the bottom line.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
And
fantastic.
we built a company with an infrastructure that, having done 3 acquisitions, I thought we'd get on a pace of doing them a little quicker than we are. And so we probably have some capacity there that with the next acquisition, it will load on the balance to make it so that infrastructure actually then can be cash flow neutral or positive. And would I have liked another acquisition done 3 or 4 months ago? Yeah. But sometimes they just take a little longer.
So do you use, strategically, do you hope to use the company's equity for acquisition or cash, a combination of both?
Yeah, right now it trades on the TSX V. It trades with pretty good volume, so we'll use some equity, but a lot of these private companies in Europe want some cash and some equity. I think after we get the next 1 or 2 done, then it's going to be that our currency is more valuable. Maybe we can move up to the actual TSX.
Yes.
And maybe we start to see some institutions buying in. Then I could see it becoming an all equity type of transaction, but I don't want to do it at the current price. It's when it's north of $1, you start saying, or $2. That's more equity, less cash.
Right. So then who else do you have to compete with? Like, what are the big players in the space?
So remember, our business is first we monitor what's going wrong. Then we analyze it and say, why did it happen? And then we seek to optimize it with certain pieces of software and or equipment that fix the problem. So in those 3 spaces, you have sort of 3 different competitors. And at the last one, you get paid a lot more. So you start dealing with, competing with, what's the name, F5?
F5, yeah.
F5 is a sort of a branded company that we just beat for a piece of business in Colombia. So that, in that space. In the first 2 spaces, you might bump into the guys who just bought the shop down the road a couple of years ago. Forgetting their name. Solus. So they basically start looking at a high level what's going on, but they don't necessarily get embedded in the network the same way as we do, because we're already inside with Milestones. We see everything that's happening in the network.
I see.
And
so it sounds like it's very specialized, and there's no big household names that you have to compete with.
SolarWinds. That's one part of it. So no, there are some players, but this is intended to be a very boring, don't go to cocktail parties and tell people about this. This is not as exciting as talking about pot. But when you got 5,000 clients, you got 1 million endpoints, and what you're doing is you're just adding more value to each of those clients while you add more clients. That's a very steady business. It's not designed to be, oh my God, it went 10 times bigger this year or it goes to 0. No. This is supposed to grow sort of that 15 to 30% a year, and it's supposed to keep growing and be steady, and that's the kind of business we're building.
Sounds fascinating. Is there a risk that, or is there a hope that a big behemoth like Microsoft or one of its subsidiaries or a likewise major company comes in and buys you? Or is there a risk that they just elbow you aside and say, hey, they've built a great business, now we know how to do it, and we'll just compete with them because we have deeper pockets?
Yeah, I think if I was running a PE firm, right, so Mitel got bought by a PE firm, I'd buy us, right? Why wouldn't you? Ultimately, we're a component of a solution that the direction everything's going to is more utilization of voice as an application across the internet than it is buying a phone with a string. And so I think that could occur. It's only a risk if what we don't do is keep strength. And strength is cash flow positive. Strength is a business that shows earnings per share, and that's where this thing needs to land as we go through this year.
Okay. What are the big milestones you hope to hit in 2020 that are going to excite investors?
Yeah, so I think a couple of key milestones that we're really targeting in the year. We've been very clear about acquisitions. I think completing an acquisition this year will be a big milestone for us. I think, as Bruce talked about, right, cash flow and EBITDA positive is something we're very focused on achieving. Not going to give a time frame at this point, but certainly near future. So.
Yeah, and for me, I think when you list a company through a shell, you need to make sure that they know how to file their quarters, that they can do it in a timely fashion. Because if you move to a bigger exchange, you have to take away days. And so I think this is a company that should do what we're going to do, and then it should look at uplisting so that it can actually be attractive or a potential investment from some of the institutional groups. That they're not going to buy a whole lot of it, but they can all buy a little bit because now you're on a real exchange at the higher level. You're a steady business. You're a Canadian business that's international, so you've diversified geographies. And, do you make money with hotels? Yep. Do you make money with governments? Yep. Banks? Yep. And so this is I could see if we finish the year well, it starts to have a component of institutional holdings.
Sure.
And so
what percentage is owned by insiders?
About 24, 25%.
24, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and who's the biggest shareholder?
Sir Terence Matthews.
Well-respected Canadian industrialist, to say the least.
And he tends to be a person who owns a lot of stock and doesn't sell much.
Right. Long-term investor. Perfect. All right, well, that's a great update. We're going to leave it there for now. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
On your line, Sophie.